My hands hadn't even dried from the lake when I opened my banking app expecting to clear some routine payments. What I saw instead stopped my heart. 5 years of savings, every cent, wiped out. The screen showed a single brutal number. 0. I raised my eyes slowly toward my brother-in-law sitting across the living room, swirling his drink, wearing a grin that could only belong to someone who felt completely untouchable. The rest of the family sat frozen, pretending they hadn't heard anything. But I heard everything, and in that moment, something fundamental shifted inside me. This wasn't the moment I fell apart. This was the moment I finally woke up. My name is Florence, and I spent most of my life believing that family was the one thing you could count on without question. I grew up in Portland in a house that always carried the smell of sawdust and fresh coffee on Sunday mornings. My parents owned a modest hardware store near the edge of the city, the kind of neighborhood business where regulars came not just to buy things, but to sit and talk for a while. They raised me with a simple code: work hard, mean what you say, never reach for what isn't yours. My younger sister Allison operated by a completely different set of rules. While I spent my summers stocking shelves and learning the business, she spent hers chasing whatever felt exciting that week. My mother would sigh, my father would smile, and I would quietly cover for her, telling myself she just needed more time to find her footing. Time, unfortunately, had other plans. Just after I turned 25, a drunk driver blew through a red light and took both of my parents in an instant. The grief didn't just break the world, it hollowed it out entirely. We sat in a lawyer's office days later, barely functional, listening to the details of the estate: a small house, the store, and a modest savings account. When everything was divided, Allison and I each received our portion. I invested mine into the boutique I'd been building toward for years. Allison invested hers in Kyle. He arrived in her life like a thunderstorm, all charisma and volume and carefully performed confidence. The kind of man who moves through rooms like he's already won something he never actually competed for. Within months, they were married. Within a year, Allison had become a quieter, more cautious version of herself, always stealing a glance at Kyle's expression before she dared to speak. I noticed it. She dismissed it. "He just wants what's best for us," she'd say softly, though her eyes never quite agreed. The lake house gathering had been Uncle Robert's idea, a chance for the family to reconnect and reset. I actually let myself believe in it. I packed snacks and sweaters and a stubborn, hopeful warmth that I should have guarded more carefully. When I pulled up to the dock and saw sunlight scattering across the water, it looked like a welcome. Emma found me first and pulled me into a hug, whispering that I should prepare myself for something without saying what. Inside, I tried to hold on to normal. I smiled when it was expected. I made small talk when silence got uncomfortable, but Kyle's laughter pushed through every room like it owned the space, and each time Allison looked at me, there was something urgent in her eyes that never quite made it to her lips. The whole house felt like weather about to turn. The first sign came quietly enough that I almost dismissed it. My laptop had been sitting on the dresser in the guest room exactly where I'd placed it when I went downstairs to help Emma with dinner. But when I returned, the angle of the screen was slightly off. The charging cable was plugged into a port I never used, just a few inches of difference. But it landed wrong in my chest, deliberate and quiet and wrong. I ran my fingers over the keyboard and felt the faint warmth of recent use. I checked the browser history. It wasn't empty. It was clean, meaning it had been deliberately wiped. A slow chill climbed up my spine. I told myself I was overreacting. My instincts refused to agree. Later that night, while the family gathered around the card table downstairs, I picked up my phone to approve a routine boutique payment and found it declined. I tried again. Same result. I told myself it was a technical issue and pushed it aside. It wasn't until the next morning that the full weight of it hit me. My business partner Claire called early. Her voice clipped and controlled in a way that told me she was working hard not to sound alarmed. "Florence, the vendor payment bounced again. Your account is showing 0. My stomach dropped before I even opened the app. Some part of me had already been bracing for it all night. I watched the screen load and the numbers rearrange themselves into nothing. Not a glitch, not an error, 0. Gone. I walked into the kitchen feeling like I was moving through water. The smell of coffee and the sound of forks on plates felt distant and unreal. When I said that my money was gone, the room went silent. Uncle Robert rose to his feet. Emma crossed the room to my side. I held up my phone, showing the transfer records that had gone through overnight. The murmurs started, the disbelief, but two people didn't move at all. Allison, who stared into her mug like she could sink into it. And Kyle leaned back in his chair, arms folded, wearing an expression that gave away nothing and somehow everything. Emma asked if I'd called the bank. I told her I had. They confirmed the password, and security answers had been entered correctly from a recognized device. The kitchen went cold. I didn't look away from Kyle when I said he had been near my laptop the day before. I asked him directly if he had been in my room. Allison snapped upright. She demanded to know if I was accusing her husband. Kyle exhaled a short, dismissive laugh and suggested maybe my business partner had made an error, or maybe I simply didn't understand how money worked. His voice carried the kind of ease that belongs to people who expect to never be held accountable. I told him to show us his bank records. If he was clean, he'd have nothing to hide. His smirk shifted slightly. He said he owed me nothing. I told him that if he wasn't involved, he'd be the loudest person in the room demanding answers. Allison's hands were shaking. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Kyle leaned forward then, his voice dropping into something colder. We needed it more than you. The room erupted. I barely heard any of it. I felt something settle deep inside me, something hard and quiet and decided. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a targeted betrayal, and it was the last moment I spent being afraid of him. I don't remember my legs giving out. 1 second I was standing in that kitchen, and the next I was gripping the back of a chair while the room continued to unravel around me. My hands were cold, my breathing had gone shallow, but my mind had never been sharper. Shock has a way of stripping everything down to the essential truth beneath it. Allison was saying something in a trembling voice, but I couldn't hear her. My attention had locked onto Kyle, who sat with the unbothered posture of a man who had already decided how the story ended. That confidence, so practiced, so certain, did something unexpected to me. It didn't crush me. It clarified me. I stood up. My legs weren't steady, but my decision was. My hand found the strap of my bag and closed around the leather like an anchor. When I lifted it from the chair, Kyle's eyes moved to my hands. Just a flicker of attention. Enough. I told him that in that case, he wouldn't mind what was coming next. Every breath in the room seemed to pause. Kyle shoved his chair back and stood. He told me I wasn't calling anyone. Before he could take another step, Uncle Robert moved in front of him, shoulders squared, voice quiet and immovable. Kyle laughed and told him to step aside. He turned back to me and said the money was gone, buried, and I would never recover a cent of it. The way he said it wasn't a bluff. It was a man reporting facts he believed to be permanent. Allison finally rose. Her voice cracked when she said his name. He didn't look at her. He grabbed her wrist and pulled her to his side in one smooth, practiced motion that made my stomach turn. I stepped toward her and asked gently what was really happening. Her eyes found mine, haunted and exhausted. She started to speak. His grip tightened. He told her not to say a single word. Emma moved forward and told him to let Allison speak. Kyle turned on her. I said again that nobody was leaving until every dollar was returned or until the police arrived. He laughed at that, asking what exactly the police were going to do for me, suggest I feel better. He believed this was still his moment. He hadn't realized it was already over, because while he had been performing his confidence for the room, I had been remembering something he knew nothing about. 6 months earlier, after a cyber attack targeted my boutique's network, I had installed a security program on my laptop. It worked quietly and automatically, capturing photos of anyone who accessed the device, logging every keystroke, recording timestamps, and storing device identifiers. If someone had used my laptop in the night, every second of it was already documented and safely backed up. I reached into my bag for my phone. Kyle lunged. Uncle Robert stepped in front of him again. I repeated that Kyle wouldn't mind what came next. Then I dialed. The dispatcher answered almost immediately. I gave my name, the address of the lake house, and reported ongoing financial fraud with a steadiness that surprised even me. Kyle waved it off, performing contempt for whoever was still watching. But something had shifted in him. I could see it under the performance. A flicker of recalculation. I ended the call and told the room we would wait. Kyle spun toward Allison and ordered her to pack immediately. She didn't move. Her fingers bunched the fabric of her sweater. When I called her name softly and asked her to just tell the truth, she looked between us, between my stillness and his agitation, and I watched something change in her face. He grabbed her arm again. Emma stepped forward and told him to back off. He told her to stay out of it. And then for the first time since I arrived at that lake house, it wasn't me who changed the dynamic. It was Allison. She pulled her arm free and said she was tired. Tired of lying for him. Tired of all of it. The room held completely still. Kyle stared at her like she'd just done something unforgivable. Before he could respond, the sound arrived. A heavy crash against the front door shook the walls, rattled the windows, sent 2 framed photos off their nails and onto the floor. Everyone flinched. Seconds later, the door swung open and cold morning air pushed through the hall ahead of heavy footsteps. Portland police! Nobody move! Kyle's entire performance collapsed. The color dropped out of his face as three uniformed officers entered the living room, followed by a plainclothes detective. A woman named Harmon, who moved with the deliberate quiet of someone who had already done her homework. She held a folder. I stepped forward when she asked for Florence. She told me the bank's cybersecurity team had flagged unusual transfer activity tied to my accounts and traced multiple unauthorized login attempts back to this address. Kyle started to stammer that it was a misunderstanding, that someone must have accessed the device without his knowledge. Detective Harmon observed that the logins had come from a recognized device. Uncle Robert's gaze drifted toward the guest room. Mine stayed on Kyle. I handed Detective Harmon my phone. Inside the folder I had prepared was the evidence my security software had gathered without anyone's knowledge. Photo after photo of Kyle at my laptop in the middle of the night, the screen reflected in his face, his hands on the keyboard, every timestamp intact, every detail documented. The detective's expression remained professional, but her voice cooled noticeably. She told Kyle to turn around and place his hands behind his back. He stumbled backward, insisting it was crazy, demanding that Allison tell them the truth, that she say he hadn't done it. But Allison wasn't moving toward him. She was standing beside me, tears running down her face, steadier than I had seen her in years. She told him quietly that he had done it and that he knew he had. He looked at her with something that started as rage and shifted quickly into disbelief. He told her she was nothing without him. She stepped forward and said she had been nothing with him. His face broke apart. They cuffed him. His wedding ring struck the metal with a small, sharp sound. As they moved him toward the door, he shouted my name like it was a threat, insisting this wasn't finished. But it was already finished. It had been finished the moment the security software took its first photograph. After the cars rolled down the gravel drive and the sirens faded out, the lake house went completely quiet. Allison and I stood on the porch in the morning air, and I watched her look at the world like someone seeing it clearly for the first time in a long time. She looked small but not fragile. She looked like someone realizing the ground was still there to stand on. Over the following week, Detective Harmon kept me updated as the bank pieced together Kyle's digital trail. When she called to confirm that most of the funds had been recovered and the remaining amount would be covered under fraud protection, I sat down on the edge of my bed and simply breathed. 5 years of work, returned. Allison reached out to a friend with a spare room and filed for divorce not long after. She stayed with me for a while, filling my apartment with soft apologies and the smell of whatever she was baking at midnight. When guilt would roll through her in waves, I reminded her that surviving someone like Kyle wasn't weakness, it was endurance. And choosing differently now was courage. A few weekends later, the family came back to the lake house, not to reunite, but to reclaim. We repainted the porch railing, repaired the windows Kyle had once slammed hard enough to crack the frames, and pulled open every curtain we could find. The house stopped feeling like a place where something bad had happened. It started feeling like a place where something had been restored. Standing on the dock watching the light move across the water, I understood something I hadn't had words for before. Justice doesn't undo the wound, but it clears enough ground that healing has somewhere to take root. A month later, I stood in my second boutique with sunlight crossing the new displays like something I had fought for and earned. The money was back, the doors were open, and I felt, for the first time in longer than I could easily measure, like the life I was standing in was genuinely mine. Allison came by that afternoon carrying pastries, her smile quieter than it used to be, but real in a way it hadn't been for years. She wasn't healed, but she was moving towards something that belonged to her. Looking back at everything, at the lake house, at Kyle, at what broke and what was rebuilt, the one truth that stayed clear was this: sharing blood with someone does not give them a claim on your dignity. Only the boundaries you hold can do that.